Hi, friend. Welcome to Rainy Tailies, a quiet place for gentle stories told beneath the sound of rain. Here, the world slows down for a while. The rain falls softly outside, and we listen to the small moments that often go unnoticed. Memories, letters, thoughts, and dreams. Each story you'll hear tonight is meant to bring calm to your mind and warmth to your heart. So find a cozy spot, let the rain keep you company, and allow your thoughts to drift with the sound. Now, let's begin tonight's story. It began the way most nights in November do, without warning, without rush, just a quiet surrender of the sky. The first raindrop tapped against the window pane like a hesitant knock, and then another, until the glass shimmered with gentle percussion. The lamp beside the bed hummed softly, its amber light pooling over the wooden desk where a half-written letter lay waiting. The scent of chamomile floated through the room, mingling with the faint musk of wet air seeping in through the slightly open window. Remember thinking that the rain outside sounded almost alive, like a slow conversation between clouds and rooftops. Beyond the curtain, the city was dissolving into watercolor streetlights ending in puddles, cars melting into their reflections. Everything felt quieter when it rained, as if the world was holding its breath. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, sat near the window, and listened. The kind of listening that doesn't demand an answer, just presence. The kettle clicked off with a soft sigh. I poured the steaming tea into a chipped mug, the one with faded blue flowers on its rim, and the warmth seeped into my palms. Every time it rained like this, my mind would wander to that city, the one no map remembers, the one that only comes alive when the sky darkens and the rain begins to fall. It wasn't a dream, not exactly. More like a place I had once visited and perhaps never truly left. I found it by accident years ago, wandering through the noise of my thoughts, searching for something that no longer had a name. And when I arrived, it was raining, always raining. The streets glistened with silver veins, and the air carried the scent of soil, paper, and memory. They called it the city that sleeps in the storm, a place built on reflection, where nothing stirred beneath the sun. When the skies cleared, its alleys vanished, its windows faded into clouds. But when the rain returned, so did the people's soft-spoken figures wrapped in long coats, their footsteps syncing with the rhythm of falling water. There were no clocks, no deadlines, only a shared agreement. The city would awaken only when the world was ready to rest. I used to walk those streets barefoot, feeling the cool cobblestones press against the soles of my feet, grounding me in the hum of existence. The lamps glowed with a kind of golden melancholy, and every corner held a sound, the clinking of teacups behind misted glass. The distant echo of a violin played for no one in particular. Sometimes I'd stop by the old bookstore near the bridge. Its sign hung crookily, the letters half erased by time, and yet it never failed to draw me in. Inside, the shelves were lined with books swollen by humidity, their spines breathing faintly as though alive. The shopkeeper, a woman with hair like rain clouds, never asked questions. She'd simply smile and hand me a towel to dry my hands. "You arrived just in time," she would say. "The city needed you tonight." I never knew what she meant, and I never asked. Maybe everyone who found that place carried something unfinished, an apology unsent, a goodbye too sharp to speak, a memory too tender to let go. In that city, under that rain, everything softened. Words lost their edges. Time lost its urgency. Outside my real window now, the rain thickened, drumming gently on the tin of the roof. The sound felt almost familiar, like the voice of someone I used to love calling from another lifetime. I leaned closer to the glass and traced the pattern of droplets as they raced each other down. For a moment, I thought I could see the faint outline of that forgotten city reflected there. The curved bridge, the clock tower shrouded in mist, and a single street lamp flickering against the downpour dot. A shiver of nostalgia passed through me. I took a sip of tea, its sweetness grounding me back to the present. But part of me still stood in that other place, drenched in memory, surrounded by people who existed only when it rained. Maybe, I thought, that city never truly disappears. Maybe it waits inside us all the version of ourselves that only wakes when we slow down enough to hear the rain. The lamp flickered, and I smiled at the thought. Outside, the world blurred softer still, as though the storm itself was tucking the city in for the night. And somewhere between thunder and tea, I whispered to the rain, I remember. Morning never truly came, only a gray hush that softened the outlines of everything. The rain had not stopped. It merely changed its rhythm, slower now, like a careful hand tracing the city's shoulders. I woke to the sound of it, steady and familiar, and for a moment, I couldn't tell if I was still dreaming. The air carried the scent of damp paper and distant thunder. My reflection in the fogged glass looked blurred, as if I belonged to both worlds, the one outside and the one within. On the windowsill lay an old brass key. I didn't remember leaving it there. Its surface was tarnished, edges worn smooth from years of being held, turned, forgotten, and rediscovered. It had always followed me, this key, though I could never recall what door it opened. I picked it up, turning it over between my fingers. Cold, heavy, and faintly humming, as if it still carried the sound of locked rain dot. It wasn't just a key. It was a reminder, a promise I had made to myself long ago on the night I left the city that sleeps in storms. I had stood by a window much like this one, watching the same kind of rain fall, and told myself that I would return, not to stay forever, but to remember to keep that softness alive in a world too quick to forget. I held the key against the glass now, pressing lightly until a small circle cleared through the fog. Outside, the streets shimmered like threads of mercury. Drops of rain caught the early light, turning each puddle into a mirror. Somewhere beyond that curtain of mist, I knew the other city was stirring, the one no train ticket could take me to, the one that only opened its gates when the heart slowed enough to listen. I closed my eyes and listened. The rain shifted, deepened. In the silence between the drops, I thought I heard faint footsteps on wet stone, a bell from the clock tower I remembered, and the quiet laughter of someone carrying an umbrella, too small for two. I smiled without meaning to. Maybe I wasn't hearing them at all. Maybe memory has its own weather. On the table, next to the letter I never finished, lay a small envelope creased, watermarked, as if it too had survived the same storm. Inside was a single dried petal, pressed flat against thin paper. I didn't know when I'd placed it there, but I remembered where it came from. The garden on the edge of the rain city, where the flowers only bloomed under moonlit drizzle. The woman at the tea shop had given it to me once, saying it would bring me back when I was ready. I slipped the key into my pocket. Its weight was oddly comforting, like holding a fragment of silence. As I walked through my small apartment, everything seemed to echo faintly the creak of floorboards, the sigh of the kettle reheating water, the soft brush of curtains breathing against the window frame. It all belonged to the same quiet orchestra. When I stepped outside, the air felt cool and clean. The rain greeted me instantly, dotting my hair, tracing my collar. The street below glistened, empty but alive. A cat darted between cars, shaking its tail, unimpressed by weather or wonder. I laughed softly. There was a small alley I hadn't noticed before, just beside the old bookstore on my block. I could have sworn it wasn't there yesterday. Its entrance shimmered faintly, the kind of shimmer water makes when it bends light through a bottle. I hesitated, but the sound of the rain seemed to deepen, drawing me forward. Each step echoed differently, softer, as though the ground beneath was shifting into something familiar. My fingers brushed the key in my pocket. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I felt something awaken in me, a quiet recognition, a pulse that matched the rhythm of the storm got. At the end of the alley stood a door. Wooden, arched, its handle worn smooth. Rainwater dripped from its edges, but the brass keyhole gleamed alive. I took a breath, unsure if I should knock or turn back. But before doubt could bloom, the rain surged, washing the world in silver, and I heard it again, the faint toll of the clock tower far away, calling softly like a lullaby from another lifetime. The key in my palm pulsed warm. I fitted into the lock. It turned without resistance, as if it had been waiting all this time. And as the door creaked open, a gust of air touched my face, cool, fragrant, laced with petrichor and memory. Somewhere beyond that threshold, the rain city was waking. I stepped through. The first thing I noticed was the sound. It wasn't loud or sudden, just a slow, continuous rhythm, the kind that fills every space without asking permission. Rain tapping on cobblestones, dripping from awnings, whispering down gutters. It was a language, one I used to understand instinctively. I stood there for a moment, eyes closed, letting the sound rearrange my heartbeat until it matched the city's pulse. When I opened them, I was standing on a street that looked half-dreamed. Buildings leaned close to one another like old friends sharing secrets, their windows fogged, edges softened by the mist. The streets themselves glowed faintly, as if drawn in liquid ink, dark and shimmering. Each puddle reflected a slightly different world, a blurred lamplight here, a moving shadow there, a memory walking somewhere I couldn't quite follow. I took a few steps forward. The rain splashed gently around my shoes, making concentric ripples that seemed to breathe. It smelled of wet stone, moss, and the faint sweetness of bread baking somewhere nearby. That smell used to guide me in this place. It meant the tea shop wasn't far, but before I could see it, I wanted to wander. I needed to relearn the map my heart once knew by sound alone. The streets curved in lazy spirals, as though the city had been sketched by rain itself. Signs swayed quietly above doorways, written in languages that felt both familiar and forgotten. A small bookstore leaned against a florist's shop, their shared roof dripping rhythmically onto a row of empty chairs. From one open window, I heard the faint scratch of a record playing something old, soft, and full of static, like a memory trying not to fade. Every few steps, I passed someone. Not quite a stranger, not quite a ghost. Their faces were gentle, eyes distant, each carrying an umbrella. It seemed more like a part of them than an object. They nodded as I walked by, as though we shared an understanding. Here, there was no need to speak loudly. Words could drown in rain too easily. One woman in a gray coat stopped near a puddle, holding her umbrella slightly tilted. The reflection beneath her was not the same as her real self. It was younger, smiling, her hand clasped with someone who wasn't there. She noticed me watching and smiled faintly, a knowing curve of the lips. "It always remembers better than we do," she said, motioning toward the puddle. Her voice was like the rustle of pages turning. Before I could reply, she stepped away and vanished into the mist, her reflection lingering for a heartbeat longer. I crouched down beside that same puddle. The water was warm, trembling with tiny ripples. In its surface, I saw flashes my own memories stitched to this place. Nights spent walking aimlessly, letters written and never sent, laughter that disappeared before it reached the walls. The city wasn't just alive in the rain. It was the rain, collecting every sigh, every whisper, every secret too soft for sunlight. As I stood again, I noticed the lamps along the street beginning to brighten, their glow bleeding slowly through the fog. The rain thickened and the reflections deepened, turning the ground into a living mirror. Somewhere above, thunder rolled, not angry, but reassuring, like an old friend clearing his throat before telling a story. I wandered on. Each step carried the faintest echo of music. The rain played its melody on rooftops and leaves, on glass and skin. A child's laughter floated by, though I saw no child. The scent of tea grew stronger, guiding me toward a narrow bridge. Beneath it, the water ran smooth and silver, carrying tiny paper boats folded from old letters. I leaned on the railing and watched them drift, each one bearing words that blurred as soon as they touched the current. Apologies, wishes, fragments of names. That's when I realized this city was never built to last. It wasn't made of stone or steel, but of remembrance. Every drop of rain was a story someone forgot to tell. And yet, as long as it rained somewhere in the world, this place would find a way to wake again. I smiled to myself, though a quiet ache pulsed in my chest. Maybe we all build such cities inside us, places we visit only when we can't sleep, when regret grows tender instead of sharp, when the world feels too heavy to hold alone. The rain softened again, falling like dust on water. The lamps flickered in response. Ahead, down a narrow street veiled in mist, I saw it at last. The small tea shop with clouded windows. Its door was slightly open, warm light spilling out like an invitation. I took a deep breath, tasting the wet air, and walked toward it. Behind me, the puddles trembled, capturing each step before letting it go. The bell above the door gave a muted chime as I entered, a sound so soft it could have been mistaken for a sigh. The warmth inside was immediate, like stepping into the memory of a hug. Steam curled up from several teapots behind the counter, and the air was thick with the scent of bergamot and something sweet, maybe honey or cinnamon bark. The windows were fogged, nearly opaque, but the shadows of the rain still danced behind them, moving like slow dancers in the mist. A few patrons sat scattered at wooden tables, each with their own island of quiet. Some read books swollen with humidity. Others simply stared into their cups, as though the swirling tea held entire lifetimes. No one looked up when I came in, and that felt right. In this place, people seemed to exist without the need for notice. The same woman was there, the shopkeeper with silver hair that looked spun from clouds. She hadn't aged at all, or maybe time just worked differently here. When she saw me, she smiled. That knowing smile I remembered, and motioned for me to sit near the window. "You kept the key," she said simply. "I did," I replied, surprised at how easily the words came. She placed a cup before me, its rim trembling with ripples from the rain outside. The tea smelled familiar, grounding, but there was something else, something faintly electric, like the scent before a storm. "You'll need it again," she said, pouring another cup for herself. I nodded, unsure what she meant, but the warmth of the cup in my hands stilled the question. Outside, through the steamed glass, I could just make out a figure standing under the awning. Someone holding an umbrella the same shape, the same pattern I used to know. Dotted was black, with thin white lines curling around its surface, like tiny rivers meeting at the center. When the rain touched it, the fabric shimmered faintly, as if whispering back to the sky. I blinked, and memory stirred. That umbrella had once been mine, or at least it had been given to me here, on a night much like this one. I stood and stepped outside. The rain welcomed me instantly, cool and clean, tracing along my sleeves. The figure holding the umbrella turned slowly. It wasn't anyone I recognized, yet something in their eyes felt hauntingly familiar. They smiled soft, almost shy, and tilted the umbrella to share the shelter with me. The rain curved perfectly around its edge, leaving a small circle of silence for us to stand in. "You left this behind," the stranger said, voice calm as rainfall. They handed me the umbrella's handle. The moment my fingers brushed it, a low hum vibrated through the air, subtle but alive. The rain seemed to lean closer, listening. I didn't remember leaving it, but I didn't argue. I looked up at the canopy above us. The rain hit its surface in patterns, as if forming words too delicate to catch. Each drop carried a whisper, some clear, some just on the edge of hearing. I closed my eyes, trying to listen harder. Don't forget the light in the storm. You're safe to return now. Some goodbyes aren't endings. The voices came and went like breaths, dissolving into one another until they were only rhythm again. My heart tightened not in pain, but in recognition. I realized then that this umbrella wasn't meant to keep the rain away. It was meant to speak for it. The stranger watched me, then nodded toward the street. Walk a little, they said. It remembers better when you move. So we walked, side by side, through streets that glimmered like rivers of glass. The umbrella whispered softly between us, its voice shifting with each block, sometimes humming, sometimes sighing, sometimes quiet as thought. The stranger didn't ask my name, and I didn't ask theirs. It felt unnecessary, as though we already knew each other somewhere between the drops. At a small bridge, the stranger stopped. It's yours again, they said, handing me the umbrella. I took it carefully, afraid it might vanish. Will I see you again? I asked. Their smile was rain itself, gentle, inevitable. Only when you listen. Then they turned, dissolving into the mist as though they'd simply stepped into the rhythm of the storm. I stood there for a while, holding the umbrella. The rain still whispered, though softer now, murmuring things I couldn't quite translate. I opened it fully, tilted it back, and listened. The sound wasn't lonely anymore. It was alive. It was home. When I finally walked on, I realized I no longer felt the cold. The city shimmered around me, brightened by every drop, and as the rain continued its endless lullaby, I understood that every return begins not with a step, but with the sound of something calling your name in the quiet between storms. The clock tower rose above the mist like a memory refusing to fade. Its stones were slick with rain, every crevice glistening under the lamplight that struggled to reach it. I walked slowly toward it, the umbrella still whispering faintly in my hand. Each step echoed softly against the cobblestones, swallowed almost instantly by the sound of the rain in daylight. If daylight ever truly existed here, the tower would have seemed ordinary. But in the storm, it breathed. The face of its clock shimmered faintly, hands made of something between metal and light. They didn't move in the usual way. Instead, they swayed gently, marking time and rhythm with thunder rather than minutes. The air around it was thick, resonant, humming with energy that wasn't threatening, but deeply alive. I stood at its base, looking up. Every few seconds, the low roll of thunder would travel through the stones, a pulse I could feel in my chest. It wasn't the sound of warning, it was the sound of remembering. Each rumble seemed to say, "You are here now. You have always been here." The rain softened for a moment, enough for me to hear the faint ticking beneath the thunder, a heartbeat of brass and cloud. I followed the sound around the tower to a narrow door half hidden by ivy. My key, still warm in my pocket, pressed faintly against my leg, reminding me it had opened one door already. Still, I reached for it again, curious. The lock turned easily, as though expecting me. The hinges sighed as I stepped inside. The air was cooler there, filled with the scent of dust, rain, and something faintly metallic. A spiral staircase wound upward, and small lanterns floated along the wall, flickering with the pulse of distant lightning. I climbed slowly, hand brushing the damp stone. Each step felt like ascending through layers of time childhood. First love, first loss. The thunder outside followed me, low and patient. By the time I reached the top, the sound had become a steady hum, like a lullaby vibrating through the floor. The room beneath the clock face was round, filled with gears and wheels that turned without friction, their movements deliberate but unhurried. In the center stood an old wooden chair facing the window, and beside it, a small table with 2 cups of tea still steaming. One was untouched. I hesitated, then sat in the empty chair. From this height, the city below looked endless, a sea of rooftops and silver reflections. Rain streaked the glass, each drop refracting the glow of countless windows. Somewhere, I could hear music drifting faintly through the streets, carried by the wind, a violin, or perhaps just the rain finding melody against metal. The second cup across from me steamed gently, untouched but warm, as if someone had just stepped away. I reached toward it, but stopped when the thunder deepened one long, tender roll that filled the space like a sigh. Then I heard it, a voice, quiet as breath, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You kept time even when you tried to forget," it said. I looked around, half expecting to see the shopkeeper or the stranger with the umbrella. But the room was empty except for gears and light. "I didn't mean to forget," I whispered. I just stopped listening. The gears turned slowly, the minute hand on the clock face shifting with a graceful click. The thunder answered in kind, a sound like distant laughter swallowed by clouds. The voice came again, softer this time. "Time doesn't move here. It breathes. When you remember, it inhales. When you forgive, it exhales." I leaned back in the chair, eyes on the blurred lights below. Each flash of lightning illuminated the rain-slicked streets like veins of silver threading through the city's heart. Somewhere out there, the tram would be gliding through the storm, the tea shop glowing behind its fogged glass, the bridge cradling paper boats of forgotten words. The thunder rolled again, slower now, fading into a hum so deep it felt like silence. The hands of the clock trembled once, then still pointing not at any hour, but toward the horizon itself, where storm met sleep. I sat there until my tea cooled. The city below never rushed, never asked for more than I could give. It simply was, alive in its rain-soaked slowness. I could feel it breathing with me. As I stood to leave, I noticed something carved into the edge of the table, a small inscription, nearly erased by time. I ran my fingers over the faint letters, tracing the words until they became clear. "When you no longer chase the clock, the rain will stop waiting." I smiled at that quietly, inwardly, and stepped back toward the stairs. Outside, thunder murmured one last time, softer now, almost affectionate. I understood what it meant. The storm didn't ask to be endured. It asked to be listened to. As I descended, the whisper of rain met me again, wrapping gently around my shoulders. Somewhere in the distance, a tram bell rang, and the city exhaled. When I stepped out from the clock tower, the air was softer, the rain finer, almost a mist now, like the city was whispering instead of speaking. I walked without hurry, guided by scent more than sight. The smell of bergamot grew stronger again, mingled with something warm and faintly floral. The familiar glow of the tea shop appeared through the haze, its clouded windows breathing light into the wet street. Inside, it looked exactly as I had left it, maybe exactly as it always had been. The tables gleamed with a faint sheen of condensation, each reflecting a candle flame that flickered like a heartbeat. The air was filled with low murmurs, the kind that didn't need to be heard to be felt. Someone had started humming by the counter, a melody that rose and fell like rain on leaves. The shopkeeper was there, wiping the inside of a fogged window with the edge of her sleeve. She turned when she saw me, smiling as if I had just stepped out for a moment rather than years. "You've been to the tower," she said. I nodded, still holding the umbrella, now folded and dripping lightly against the floor. "It remembered me." "They always do," she replied. "The city doesn't forget its listeners." I sat at my usual corner table near the window, the same one where I had once written half a letter, the same one that had always waited. She brought me tea without asking. Steam coiled upward, catching the candlelight, turning it to gold. Outside, the world beyond the glass looked like an old photograph slowly coming to life. Figures passed in the rain, blurred by distance and light. A couple shared an umbrella, laughing softly as they hurried down the street. A man stopped to tie his shoe under an awning. Every movement felt deliberate, slowed by the weather, softened by time. The shopkeeper placed a small saucer beside my cup. On it lay a folded napkin, slightly damp. "You left something here," she said. I unfolded it carefully. Inside was a note, written in my own handwriting, though the ink had run, the words blurring into soft shadows. I could still make out fragments. "If I ever forget how to listen, and the rain will remind me." A strange warmth spread through me, the kind that wasn't from tea. I couldn't remember writing it, but I could remember the feeling, the loneliness that had sent me searching for this place, the quiet ache that rain had always soothed. Maybe I had written it on one of those long nights years ago, when the world outside felt too loud to bear. Maybe I'd left it for my future self to find, a gentle proof that I had once known peace. "Did you know?" I asked softly. "That I'd come back for it?" The shopkeeper tilted her head, eyes reflecting the candle flame. "I didn't need to. The city did." Her words sat between us for a while, comfortable and still. She poured more tea into my cup, and the sound of it blended seamlessly with the rain against the glass. I thought about the lives that must pass through here, travelers of memory, wanderers of regret, each one drawn by storms rather than by sunshine. Through the window, the streetlight outside flickered, its reflection quivering across the table. I realized how much I had missed this, the stillness, the way silence could feel full instead of empty. The umbrella beside me hummed faintly, its whispers now softer, more like breathing. I reached for my letter again, the one I had never finished. The paper was damp at the edges, but still legible. The pen, somehow waiting on the table, felt warm in my hand. I didn't think much about what to write. The words came on their own, simple and true. If you ever forget where to begin again, start with the sound of rain. When I finished, I folded the paper neatly and slid it beneath my cup, letting a drop of tea fall onto the corner so it would blur, so it would look like it had waited years for someone to find it. Maybe, in a way, it already had. The shopkeeper's voice broke the gentle silence. "Will you stay long this time?" I smiled faintly. "Just until the city sleeps again." She nodded, as if that answer was the only one possible. "Then let it rest knowing you listened." Outside, a small child ran past, splashing through a puddle, laughing freely in a way that only children and rain understand. The sound carried through the glass, bright and soft, and for a moment I closed my eyes, breathing it in. The tea was cooling now, but the warmth in me remained. The city beyond the window shimmered under its endless drizzle, alive but unhurried. And as I sat there, wrapped in the hum of thunder and tea, I thought that maybe this was all any of us ever needed, to return, to listen, and to leave a note behind for when we forget how to begin again. When I left the tea shop again, the rain had gentled into a silver veil. The umbrella whispered above me, catching the faint hiss of drizzle as it slid down its curved surface. The streets shimmered with the reflections of lamps and windows, like fragments of letters scattered across the ground letters written long ago and never fully dried. I walked without direction, letting the city lead. The air tasted of metal and quiet sweetness. Every corner I turned seemed to hold a memory half remembered, half imagined. I could see it in the way the light pooled on the cobblestones, in the scent of rain-soaked books coming from an unseen window, in the echo of footsteps that didn't quite belong to me. As I passed under an archway, something small and pale caught my eye. A piece of paper clung to the wall, damp and trembling from the wind. I peeled it off gently. The ink had bled into soft shades of blue and gray, but the handwriting was unmistakable -mine. Doubt it was one of the letters I had written here years ago, the kind that never found a destination. I used to write them on nights when the storm wouldn't sleep. Some were meant for people I had loved, others for the ones I had lost. A few, I think, were for myself. The city had always taken them in without question, letting the rain read them when I couldn't. I smoothed the page against my palm and began to read what was left. If this reaches you, then it means the rain has remembered what I could not say. I wanted to tell you that forgiveness feels like standing barefoot on wet ground cold at first, and warm when you stop resisting. That some goodbyes don't have an end. They just become quieter until they sound like rain. The rest of the words had melted away, leaving only faint brushstrokes of ink. Still, I understood. The rain had taken what it needed to carry forward. Maybe that was what this city did preserved, what mattered by letting go of what didn't. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my coat pocket. The street curved ahead, leading toward the bridge I remembered, the one where paper boats used to drift. As I reached it, I saw them again, tiny folds of letters gliding along the current, edges softened by water. Some were blank, others bore fragments of words. Home. Wait. Forgive. A woman stood by the railing, her umbrella turned inside out by the wind, but her expression calm, almost content. When she noticed me, she smiled. They always come back, she said, nodding toward the boats. Words that still have something left to say. I nodded, resting my umbrella beside hers. And when they've said it, then they sink, she replied, watching as one disappeared beneath the surface. But the river keeps their echoes. We stood there a while, watching the rain stitch circles into the water. The sky rumbled softly, not in warning, but in comfort. I thought of the countless letters the rain must have carried apologies, hopes, unfinished thoughts, and wondered how many of them belonged to me. The woman turned to leave, her steps making barely a sound. Before she disappeared into the mist, she looked back once and said, "If you listen closely, the ones you've written for yourself never stop speaking." Her words stayed with me as I walked along the bridge, fingertips brushing the wet railing. I could feel it, the faint vibration of voices beneath the metal, like the city was breathing through every surface. Each drop of rain was a syllable, each puddle a pause. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the letter again. The ink had faded even more, smearing against the lines of my hand. I smiled, folded it once more, and let it fall gently into the water. It floated for a moment, turning slowly, then drifted away with the current dot. The rain thickened, blurring everything into a moving watercolor. Across the river, lights shimmered through the fog, soft, distant, patient. I stood there until the paper was out of sight, my reflection merging with the water's restless skin. Maybe none of our words ever dry completely. Maybe they wait, somewhere between sound and silence, between the first drop and the last, for anyone to hear them again. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of tea and petrichor. I opened my umbrella and began walking back toward the heart of the city, where thunder murmured like an old story being retold. Behind me, the river kept whispering my name, syllable by syllable, until it sounded like rain. The rain had grown steadier again by the time I reached the corner near the old square. The sound of it filled the air with a rhythm that felt almost familiar, like the turning of a record left to play softly through the night. Somewhere behind that curtain of drizzle came a faint metallic chime, a bell, rhythmic and distant dot. It took me a moment to realize what it was. The tram dot glided into view as though it had been waiting for me all along. An old-fashioned streetcar made of dark wood and brass, its windows fogged from within, light glowing dimly behind them. The sign above the front read simply, "Line of Rain." I stepped closer, feeling that strange pull again, that quiet certainty that this was not a coincidence. When the doors opened, a small gust of warm air escaped, carrying the faint scent of ozone and wet fabric. I climbed aboard. The interior was dimly lit, each seat upholstered in faded blue velvet. Drops of rain clung to the ceiling, trembling like stars. There were other passengers, quiet figures, looking out the windows, hands folded in their laps, each lost somewhere between here and elsewhere. No one spoke. I found an empty seat near the middle and sat down, resting the umbrella beside me. The tram jerked gently, then began to move, the sound of its wheels blending seamlessly with the rain outside. The world beyond the glass became a blur of motion and light street lamps streaking like fireflies, reflections weaving into each other. Across from me sat a man in a long coat, his hat pulled low over his face. He was holding something, a notebook, its pages swollen from moisture. He glanced up once, catching my gaze, and gave a faint smile before returning to his writing. The tip of his pen moved slowly, deliberately, as though he was translating the sound of the storm into words. The conductor passed quietly through the aisle, his footsteps barely audible. He didn't ask for tickets, only nodded to each passenger, his eyes kind and tired, like someone who had been part of the rain for too long to fear it. When he reached me, he paused, glanced at the umbrella, and said softly, "You brought your own weather." I smiled. "It seems to follow me." He nodded thoughtfully, then continued down the tram. The bell chimed again, and outside, the scenery shifted. The streets disappeared, replaced by a long stretch of water reflecting the city's trembling lights. The tram glided as if floating, its reflection keeping pace below. I pressed my forehead against the window. The droplets on the glass refracted everything into tiny worlds, each one holding its own city, its own rain, its own version of me. For a moment, I couldn't tell if we were moving forward or standing still. Maybe both thought the man with the notebook spoke then, his voice quiet but clear. "It only runs when it rains, you know." I turned toward him, and when it doesn't, he closed the notebook gently. "Then it waits. Like everything else here. The city sleeps, and the tram dreams of motion." We sat in silence for a while after that, the hum of wheels beneath us like a lullaby. I realized that everyone on this tram seemed to carry something invisible, a thought left unfinished, a memory still tender. The air was thick with unspoken forgiveness. At one stop, a woman boarded carrying a bouquet of wilted lily wrapped in brown paper. She sat near the door and placed the flowers on the seat beside her, staring at them with the kind of softness only loss can teach. I wanted to say something, to ask if she was all right, but the rain spoke first, louder, heavier, and my words dissolved before reaching her. The tram began to slow. Through the window, I saw a familiar bridge, the same one I had stood on earlier, though now it shimmered like a reflection in water. The conductor appeared again, standing near the exit. "End of the line," he said quietly. "For now." I gathered my umbrella and stood. The other passengers remained still, content to stay a little longer in motion. When I stepped off, the ground beneath my feet rippled as though I had stepped onto the surface of a dream. The tram lingered for a moment, lights glowing softly through the fog, then faded into the curtain of rain. Its bell rang once more, distant and gentle, until it was only memory. I stood alone beneath the storm, the whisper of its rhythm wrapping around me like a familiar song. The city stretched endlessly in every direction, yet I felt no need to know where I was. The rain had become both guide and destination. I opened my umbrella again. The whispers had changed. They were humming now. A low tune that seemed to echo the chime of the departing tram. Maybe the city was reminding me, even when the world sleeps, some things keep moving quietly through the rain, carrying our words, our wishes. our softer selves to places that only exist when the storm decides to breathe. The rain was steadier now, thick enough to blur the edges of buildings and turn the world into a watercolor painting that hadn't finished drawing. I followed a narrow street lined with flickering lamps until it opened into a quiet courtyard. There, a sign swung lazily in the wind. Its letters nearly washed away, but still legible. The Rain Library. I hesitated, listening. The air around the courtyard was full of sound raindrops on leaves, the steady rhythm of gutters, and something else beneath it all, the faint rustle of pages turning. It was the kind of sound that didn't belong to time, but to memory itself. I stepped closer. The entrance wasn't guarded by doors, only by a canopy of umbrellas suspended overhead. They hung open and upside down, catching rain that never overflowed. Each drop that landed seemed to vanish into their dark fabric, as though being absorbed into stories. I walked beneath them, the world above dissolving into soft percussion dot inside. The space was vast but warm. Shelves rose toward the ceiling, carved from driftwood that still smelled faintly of the sea. Books were everywhere in stacks, on tables, even along the stairs that spiraled upward into the mist. The air was alive with the quiet hum of words, each spine trembling slightly, as if the rain itself was reading aloud. A man in a long gray coat stood near the entrance, holding an umbrella that dripped not water but light. "Welcome back," he said, voice low, as though afraid to disturb the stillness. I smiled faintly. "Do I know you?" He tilted his head. "Not yet, but the books remember you." He gestured toward a small wooden desk near the back, where an open journal lay waiting. Its pages glowed faintly under the light of a single candle. I walked over and ran my fingers across the surface. The texture was familiar, like old parchment softened by time. The first page held my handwriting. I began to read. The rain is not sadness. It is memory trying to stay gentle. The sentence struck something deep within me. I turned another page and saw sketches of umbrellas, bridges, and clock towers drawn in pale ink that shimmered when the candle flickered. Notes followed, fragments of thoughts, half-finished letters, words that must have come from nights like these when I could not sleep. "It's all here," said the man quietly behind me. "Everything the rain chose to keep." I looked around. Others moved between the aisles, men, women, children, each carrying their own umbrellas, their own quiet weather. Some stopped to read. Others simply stood before the shelves, eyes closed, listening to the whisper of turning pages. Every so often, one of them would pluck a book from the air itself, the title forming only when their hand touched it. "What happens to the stories we forget?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "They wait here, under shelter. The rain keeps them warm until we remember how to open them again." I thought about all the letters I had written, the ones that had drifted downriver, the ones I had lost to storms. Maybe they had found their way here, transformed into words the city could hold for me. A small book fell from a shelf and landed at my feet. Its cover was dark blue, the color of twilight, and across its spine were faint golden letters. "To be read when it rains." I picked it up, hands trembling slightly. The pages fluttered open on their own. Inside was a single line, written in that same flowing script I'd seen before. "Every umbrella is a shared sky." The words filled me with a strange calm, a quiet understanding that I couldn't quite explain. I looked up, and for the first time I noticed that the ceiling above was made entirely of glass beyond it. Rain danced across the surface, tracing rivers of light and shadow. It felt as though the whole library existed inside one enormous breath. The man stepped closer, closing his glowing umbrella. "Would you like to leave something behind?" he asked. I nodded. He handed me a quill and a piece of parchment that shimmered faintly like wet silk. I wrote slowly, each word careful, deliberate. "If someone finds this, know that you're not alone in the storm." The city listens. The rain remembers. When I finished, he took the page and slid it between two books on a nearby shelf. The parchment glowed softly, then faded, as though the words had dissolved into the rain itself. Outside, thunder rolled faintly, distant and tender. I looked back toward the shelves, so many stories. So many lives folded between drops of water, and felt something ease inside me. Something I hadn't even realized was tight. The man opened his umbrella again, the light spilling softly over the floor. "Come," he said. "It's still raining." I followed him out beneath the canopy of shared umbrellas. The sound of the rain was deeper now, like the pages themselves were applauding. And as we stepped back into the mist, I understood the quiet truth of this place. The rain doesn't erase. It archives. The man with the glowing umbrella guided me through winding alleys that shimmered like veins of silver. The rain followed us, gentle and persistent, stitching every step into the rhythm of the city's quiet breathing. Soon, the streets gave way to a narrow staircase that climbed between two tall buildings. Each wall slick with moss and memory. We ascended slowly, our footsteps softened by puddles. The air grew cooler the higher we went, tinged with the scent of wet stone and jasmine. When we reached the final landing, the city unfolded around us, a mosaic of rooftops, windows, and lamps, all blurred by drizzle. It was like standing inside the pulse of a dream. "This is where the city grows," he said, closing his umbrella. Before us stretched a small garden, suspended in the rain. Ferns glistened like green glass, their fronds heavy with droplets. Moss carpeted the stones, soft underfoot. Tiny flowers, pale violet, blue-gray, white as mist swayed in the wind, collecting water in their petals. Everything seemed to hum faintly, alive but unhurried. I knelt beside a shallow pool, watching ripples form and fade. The surface reflected both the rain above and the city below, as if the two worlds were meeting halfway. For a moment, I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. "When the city sleeps," he said quietly, "this garden dreams. Every drop that falls here carries a memory that someone has released. Regret, forgiveness, hope, they all take root." I looked at him, surprised. "And what do they grow into?" He smiled faintly. "Peace, if we're lucky. Rain doesn't choose what to heal. It just keeps falling until something softens." The wind stirred, brushing past us with a scent like petrichor and tea. I noticed a small wooden bench beneath a crooked tree, its leaves trembling under the drizzle. Someone had carved words into its surface, now nearly hidden by moss. I traced them with my fingertips. "Sit until the rain sounds like forgiveness." I sat down. The wood was damp, cool against my palms. Around me, the rain played a dozen rhythms on leaves, on stone, on the faint tin gutter above. The sounds overlapped gently, not in chaos, but in harmony. I realized then that this city wasn't just a place. It was a language once spoken only when the world slowed enough to listen. The man stood near the edge, looking out over the roofs. "You've walked far," he said. "Do you know why you came back?" I thought about it. About the letters, the key, the tea shop, the clock tower. About all the versions of myself that had walked these streets before searching, forgetting, remembering. "Maybe," I said slowly, because I wanted to hear what I'd left unsaid. He nodded, as if he'd been waiting for that answer. "The rain remembers for us, but it can't speak unless we return." For a long while, neither of us said anything. The drizzle turned to mist, curling between the plants like smoke. The city below was only a blur of gold and gray, a heart seen through water. Somewhere, a distant bell tolled, its sound soft as breath. When I finally stood, the man was gone. Only his umbrella remained, folded neatly beside the bench, its fabric glimmering faintly. I lifted it, feeling its quiet weight. The whispers had faded. It no longer hummed with the same urgency. It was resting now, like the city itself. I walked to the edge of the rooftop and looked down. The streets glowed faintly through the mist, alive with small movements, someone closing a window, a cat darting across a puddle, a tram bell chiming in the distance. The rain had woven everything together into one seamless lullaby. I opened the umbrella, holding it above me. The drizzle gathered on its surface, forming small constellations of droplets that shimmered before rolling away. Beneath its quiet shelter, I whispered to no one in particular, "Thank you." The words didn't need to travel far. The rain heard them, and that was enough. I stayed there until the mist thinned, until the sky above began to pale with the soft promise of morning. The city below stirred, still half asleep, but content. The rooftop garden shimmered with life, each leaf and petal breathing in the last of the night's rain. And when I finally turned to leave, I felt lighter, not because I'd found answers, but because I no longer needed them. The city had spoken in its own way. It had taught me that not every door must be locked or opened. Not every letter must dry. Not every storm must end to be understood. Sometimes it's enough to sit quietly beneath a sky that never stops listening. As I descended from the rooftop garden, the rain softened into a delicate mist, drifting through the narrow alleys like breath. The city seemed quieter now, as if every window, every cobblestone, every leaf had settled into the same rhythm, a slow, contented heartbeat under the storm. I wandered without hurry. The streets had rearranged themselves again. They always did when I wasn't looking. Buildings leaned in unfamiliar ways. Bridges curved differently, and yet everything still felt known. The rain city never stayed still, because memory never did. Soon, I found myself in a small street, lined with old houses, their facades streaked with silver trails of water. Through each fogged window glowed a faint light, some warm and golden, others cold and blue. They looked like the city's eyes, half open, dreaming. I stopped before one, drawn by a soft shadow moving inside. Through the misted glass, I could make out two figures at a table, a man and a woman. They weren't speaking, but the space between them was filled with the weight of everything unsaid. The woman traced circles on her teacup. The man stared at the rain outside, his reflection trembling in the window pane. Their faces were unfamiliar, yet I recognized the silence. It was the same kind that had lived in me once, the silence of people who still care, but had forgotten how to say. So the woman reached for a letter on the table, its paper damp and wrinkled. She hesitated, then slid it across to him. He didn't open it. They just sat there, with the sound of rain filling every pause, as if the storm itself was finishing their sentences. I stepped back, heart heavy in the softest way. Through every window I passed, similar scenes unfolded. Two old friends standing in a hallway, a mother watching her child sleep, an artist staring at an unfinished painting. All of them suspended in that tender space between holding on and letting go. Unfinished goodbyes. The city was full of them. Somewhere, a curtain shifted, and for a fleeting second, I saw myself reflected in the glass holder, perhaps, or simply more still. Behind me, the lights of the street shimmered through the mist, merging with the reflection until I couldn't tell which side of the glass I belonged to. A soft voice startled me. They never really end, do they? I turned to see a woman standing beside me. She wore a long raincoat the color of dusk, her hair damp, her umbrella folded at her side. Her eyes were kind, though there was something distant in them, like someone who'd already said goodbye too many times. I think endings are too sharp for this city, I said quietly. Here, everything blurs a little. She smiled, a sad, lovely curve of the mouth. That's how it forgives. For a moment, we stood in silence, listening to the rain touch the roofs, the leaves, the glass. Around us, the windows glowed softly, each one holding its own quiet story. I wondered how many goodbyes were being whispered at that very moment. How many were being rewritten? Softened by the sound of falling water dot, the woman took a step closer to one of the windows and pressed her hand against the glass. "Sometimes," she said, "the rain writes back." I watched as a drop of water slid down from where her palm rested, tracing the shape of her fingers before joining the streaks below. For an instant, the reflection of her hand and the one inside the window aligned perfectly, as if the city itself had reached out to meet her halfway. When she turned back to me, her eyes shimmered like the puddles under the street lamp. "Goodbye," she said simply. But before I could respond, the wind shifted, carrying her voice away like a whisper into the fog dot. She was gone. Only her reflection lingered a moment longer in the nearest window, then dissolved into rain. I stood there until the lights behind the glass dimmed and the street fell into that soft, luminous half-dark that always comes before dawn. The rain was still falling, steady and kind. I realized I wasn't sad, not really. There was something deeply right about the way this city held its goodbyes. Unfinished, gentle, open-ended. I raised my umbrella again and began to walk. Each window I passed reflected a faint echo of my own face, sometimes older, sometimes younger, sometimes smiling, sometimes not. Each one was a version of me I'd once been, still lingering somewhere, still listening to the rain. And as I reached the end of the street, I thought, maybe all our farewells are just conversations the rain continues for us. Long after we stopped speaking, the street curved downward, leading me toward a quieter part of the city where the buildings gave way to open air. Here, the rain gathered in shallow streams, running alongside the cobblestones like silver ribbons. Lanterns hung low, their reflections trembling in the water. The scent of wet earth and jasmine drifted up from the gutters, fresh and grounding. I followed the sound of trickling water until I came to a small square empty, except for a single wooden bench placed beside a narrow gutter. A steady current ran past its legs, carrying fallen petals and tiny leaves. I sat down, letting the umbrella rest beside me. The rain touched my shoulders lightly, like an old friend who knew the right distance to keep. For the first time in what felt like hours, or maybe years, I didn't feel the need to move. The bench was smooth from years of rain and waiting. Drops gathered along its edges, fell rhythmically into the gutter below, and joined the endless flow of the city's quiet murmuring. After a while, someone approached from the other side of the square. An older man, wrapped in a coat several sizes too big, holding no umbrella. His silver hair clung to his forehead, and yet his expression was calm, even warm. He carried 2 small paper cups, steam rising faintly from them. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. "Please," I said, and he took the seat beside me, the bench creaking softly in welcome. He handed me one of the cups. "Tea," he said simply. "From the shop near the clock tower. They never close, even when the storm is strongest." I smiled, recognizing the scent bergamot and something floral. I took a sip. It was slightly bitter, perfectly hot. The warmth settled into me like a memory returning home. "You look like someone who listens," he said after a pause. "Only when it rains." He laughed quietly, a deep, gentle sound. "That's when it matters most." He stared at the gutter, watching the water carry tiny fragments of leaves away. You know, people think the gutters are dirty, that they take away what's unwanted. But this city uses them differently. I glanced down at the stream. It glittered faintly, reflecting both our faces. "Differently how?" He pointed toward the current. "Every drop that falls here carries a word someone couldn't say aloud. The gutter is where they come to rest before the river takes them." We sat in silence for a while, listening. The rain wasn't heavy, but persistent, the kind that filled the air with a constant hush. The sound of it mingled with the faint rumble of thunder far away, as if the sky were whispering under its breath. "Do you come here often?" I asked. He nodded. "Every storm. I've been coming for years. Sometimes I bring tea, sometimes bread. Sometimes I just sit. To wait for someone?" He smiled faintly. "To remember someone. There's a difference." I didn't press. The rain did the talking for us, drawing lines of silver light between our shoes. After a moment, he said, "You remind me of her." "Who?" He hesitated, as if tasting the name before speaking it. "My wife. She used to say the rain had moods. That on days like this, it wasn't sad, it was thoughtful." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I never understood her then. I think I do now." He looked at me with eyes that seemed to see past time. "It's strange, isn't it? How rain can sound exactly the same on the day you fall in love and the day you say goodbye." The words lingered between us, heavy and light all at once. I wanted to reply, but found I couldn't. There was nothing to add. The truth was already in the air, echoing in the rhythm of the storm. The man finished his tea, placed the cup gently beside the bench, and stood. "I should go," he said. "The city doesn't like to be left alone too long." He looked at me then, and his smile deepened. "If you ever come back here when it rains, leave something behind. A word, a thought, a breath. The city will keep it safe." I nodded. "I will." He adjusted his coat, gave a small bow, and walked off into the mist. Within seconds, his figure dissolved into the gray, leaving only the faint outline of footprints in the puddles. I sat there a while longer, sipping the last of the tea. The gutter's flow had grown stronger, carrying tiny white petals now. Maybe from the rooftop garden. Maybe from somewhere even further back in memory. I took a deep breath, reached into my pocket, and pulled out a small coin-nothing special, worn smooth from time. I let it slip into the water, watching as it tumbled gently, caught the light, and vanished down the stream. The sound of rain around me seemed to shift, softening into something like gratitude. I closed my eyes and listened until the world became only rhythm and breath. When I finally stood, the bench glistened in the drizzle, a quiet witness to everything spoken and unspoken. The gutter kept flowing, carrying small fragments of lives downstream, never rushing, never stopping. And as I walked away, I thought of the man's words, of the rain's moods, of how even in goodbye, something always stays. Perhaps that was what the city meant to teach all along. Nothing truly leaves. It just changes its form and continues its journey. Drop by drop, through the storm dot, the rain fell more quietly that night, as if it too had grown tired from remembering. The city was nearly empty now. The shop windows were dark, the trams had gone still, and even the street lamps seemed to hum more softly. I wandered through the narrow lanes without destination, feeling the damp air cling to my skin, hearing the soft percussion of droplets against stone. Regret found me there, not suddenly, not cruelly, but with the tenderness of an old friend who had finally learned to knock before entering. It didn't speak, just walked beside me, keeping pace. Its presence was neither heavy nor light. It simply was. I passed the bridge again, the one with the paper boats. The river beneath, it was swollen with rain, shimmering like mercury. I leaned on the railing and looked down, watching the current carry small fragments of light, downstream reflections from the lamps above. Bits of gold folded into gray. Years ago, I had stood in this very place with someone whose laughter used to sound like rain. I could still remember her hands tracing circles on the railing, the way she'd tilt her head to listen when thunder rolled in the distance. She used to say storms were just the sky's way of telling us it missed the sea. I never quite understood what she meant, but I do now. Everything eventually finds its way back, sometimes in waves. Sometimes in rain, I felt regret shift beside me, quiet but awake. I knew what I wanted to ask. Dot, why didn't you stay? I didn't answer. There was no need. The rain had already asked that question 1,000 times and answered it just as often. Because we are built to leave things unfinished. Because love, too, needs a place to echo. I watched a single leaf spin in the current until it disappeared beneath the bridge. Somewhere in the distance, a door creaked open, then shut again. The sound carried across the water, small but distinct, a reminder that even in silence, life keeps speaking. I started walking again, following streets I didn't recognize, but somehow trusted. The city shifted around me, its shapes dissolving and reforming with every blink. I passed walls covered in ivy, puddles that reflected entire constellations, and windows where faces appeared just long enough to remind me that solitude was never truly empty here. Out at the end of one alley stood a mirror propped against a wall. It was cracked but clean, and in it, the rain looked like silver threads falling between two worlds. I stepped closer. The reflection wasn't exactly mine. The face staring back looked older, softer, the eyes quieter but deeper. It was the version of me that had learned to forgive. Regret stood just behind that reflection, visible only in outline, a silhouette blurred by water. Its edges glowed faintly, and for the first time, it didn't look lonely. It looked ready. Dot. I reached out and touched the glass. You can rest now, I whispered. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. The rain paused, bitter, as though listening. Then, slowly, the figure behind the reflection smiled a small, grateful curve and began to fade. The mirror shimmered once, twice, and then showed only me again. When I stepped back, I realized the rain had lightened to a fine mist. The city seemed brighter somehow, its reflections clearer. The regret that had walked beside me was gone, or maybe it had simply become part of the rain itself, no longer a weight to carry, but a rhythm to walk with. I found a small bench beneath a willow tree and sat down. The branches swayed gently overhead, scattering droplets that landed softly on my shoulders. The air smelled of earth and sky, mingled with something faintly sweet like tea left to cool. For a long while, I sat in silence, watching the city breathe. Every roof, every window, every street glowed with that familiar luminescent calm, the kind that comes only after acceptance. The storm was still there, but its voice had changed. It no longer spoke of loss, only of continuation. Yet I thought of all the people I had met here, the woman in the tea shop, the stranger with the umbrella, the man beside the gutter, and realized they weren't separate stories at all. They were all reflections of the same thing, the ways we learn to live gently with what we cannot undo. Thunder rolled once more, soft and deep. I took a slow breath and closed my eyes. The sound filled me without pain, without ache. It was simply the world exhaling, and for the first time, I felt myself exhale with it. When I opened my eyes, the city was shimmering again, every raindrop catching the faint glow of lamps like tiny blessings. Regret had returned where it belonged, not a wound, not even a shadow, but part of the rain that keeps everything alive. I smiled and whispered to no one in particular. Thank you for waiting. The wind carried my words away, folding them into the mist. Somewhere far above, the sky began to brighten behind the clouds, and I thought that maybe this was what healing really sounded like, the slow, soft return of rain after thunder. I found myself walking again, though I couldn't remember when I had stood up from the bench. The rain had slowed to a whisper, the kind that barely touched the skin yet filled every breath. The streets shimmered under its faint weight, and the air had that scent of something ending whetstone, wood, and a quiet sweetness that reminded me of early mornings. Dot, at the corner of a narrow lane, a single street lamp glowed. Its light wasn't steady. It flickered, hummed faintly, and then steadied again, as if catching its breath. The mist around it shimmered gold for an instant, and I stopped. There was something magnetic about it, something unexplainably alive. I walked closer, drawn to the warmth of that small circle of light. It was the only thing moving in the stillness, the flame within the glass trembling ever so slightly. I leaned against the nearby railing, closed my umbrella, and let the rain settle on me for a long while. I simply stood there. The world beyond the light was soft and gray, dissolving into the storm's breath. Inside this circle, though, everything was calm. The raindrops seemed slower here, their descent more deliberate. I could hear each one land a quiet tap on stone, a sigh against the metal of the lamp's post dot. It was strange how easily time disappeared when I stopped trying to count it. The city had taught me this in its own gentle way. It didn't ask for stillness. It simply offered it, again and again, until I remembered how to accept it. A cat appeared then, emerging from the shadows like a ripple of ink. Its fur was soaked, its eyes two small lanterns of green. It circled the base of the lamp once, then leapt onto the railing beside me. I half expected it to vanish, like so many things here, but it stayed. "You like the rain too?" I murmured. The cat blinked slowly, unimpressed but at peace. It began to lick its paw, careful and patient, as if it had all the time in the world. Watching it, I realized how much of my life had been spent rushing, chasing moments, chasing answers, chasing closure. But here, under this lamp, none of that seemed necessary. The rain didn't hurry, the cat didn't hurry, and the world went on just fine. The lamp flickered again. Its hum deepened for a heartbeat, then steadied once more. I tilted my head and listened. Beneath the soft buzz of the filament, I could almost hear a voice, not words, exactly, but something like meaning. Wait, that was all it said. Not as an instruction, but as a kindness. I breathed in deeply, tasting the air, feeling how cool and alive it was. The cat had finished cleaning itself, and now sat perfectly still, staring out into the mist as though guarding something invisible. Its patience was infectious. I felt my shoulders ease, my thoughts slow, my pulse align with the rhythm of the rain. The lamp began to hum again, louder this time, a deep vibration that filled the quiet street. It wasn't unpleasant. It was like the sound of an old song remembered halfway. I touched the post gently. It was warm beneath my fingertips, alive with energy. For a moment, the rain seemed to pause. The droplets hovered mid-air, catching the light like suspended glass. Time folded in on itself. Everything, the cat, the lamp, the rain, me, existed inside one shared heartbeat. Then the hum softened, and the world exhaled. The rain resumed its fall, steady and kind. The cat leapt down, shook its fur once, and trotted away into the fog, leaving tiny paw prints that vanished as soon as they formed. I smiled, realizing I hadn't spoken a word in what must have been hours. I didn't need to. The city understood silence better than speech. The lamp flickered once more, a gentle pulse of gold. I watched it for a while longer, knowing somehow that it was teaching me something I had always known but forgotten. That patience isn't waiting for storms to pass. It's learning to stand still, enough to hear the rain's heartbeat. I opened my umbrella again and stepped away from the light. Behind me, the glow dimmed just slightly, as though nodding farewell. Ahead, the street stretched into soft darkness, every puddle reflecting tiny stars of rain dot. As I walked, the words the lamp had whispered stayed with me. Wait, not as a command, but as a promise. Because somewhere, in every delay, every hesitation, every quiet pause, life was still blooming slowly, steadily, just like the rain. And perhaps that was the city's final kindness, to remind me that even in stillness, even in waiting, we are always moving one breath, one drop, One soft heartbeat at a time, Doc. By the time I reached the edge of the city, the rain had begun to thin into threads of silver. The sky was no longer heavy. It had exhaled its sorrow, its music, and now rested low and pale above the rooftops. The streets glistened, washed clean, as though the storm had taken everything sharp and softened it into reflection. I walked without the umbrella. The last few drops fell lazily, landing on my hair, my sleeves, the quiet ground. The air felt new, alive, tender, full of that hush that always comes after something has cried itself empty. Ahead, a small square opened up between the buildings. A fountain stood in its center, its basin full to the brim with rainwater. Around it, puddles reflected the faint blue of dawn. The city was breathing again. Even the silence felt awake. I sat by the fountain's edge and listened. The storm was ending, but it hadn't truly gone. It had simply changed form, becoming the mist that clung to my clothes, the droplets that trembled on the leaves, the faint trickle beneath the cobblestones. The rain was resting, not gone. Across the square, I noticed something glinting near a doorway. A single brass key lay half hidden beneath a fallen leaf. I picked it up. Its surface was warm, as though it had been waiting for me all along. The same key I had found on my windowsill when this story began, or perhaps another, made from the same promise. I turned it in my hand and smiled. Maybe some circles are meant to close gently, without noise. The city around me was stirring now. Shutters creaked open. A window above spilled light onto the street. Somewhere, a kettle whistled. The smell of bread drifted faintly through the damp air. And though I couldn't see them, I knew the others were still here. The shopkeeper wiping her windows clear. The tram driver checking his watch. The man beside the gutter preparing tea for whoever might need warmth next. The city was waking, even as it slept. I looked at my reflection in the fountain. The water was still enough to hold it steady. I saw the same face, but softer. My eyes no longer searched. They listened. I dipped my fingers into the water, tracing small circles. The ripples spread outward, blurring the image until it became nothing but light. There, in that fading reflection, I thought of everything the city had shown me. The streets drawn in water, the umbrella that whispered, the clock tower that kept time by thunder, the library that stored forgotten dreams, the bench where strangers shared silence. Every fragment was a part of something whole, something that felt like home, not because it belonged to me, but because it asked nothing in return. A soft breeze moved through the square, carrying the scent of wet stone and blooming moss. I looked up. The clouds had begun to break apart, revealing a thin band of pale gold on the horizon. The light didn't rush in. It arrived carefully, as though afraid to wake the rain too soon. I took a slow breath and let it fill me. The world felt wide again, not in distance, but in depth. Even the smallest sound, a droplet falling from a leaf, a distant door closing, the sigh of air moving through the fountain seemed to echo with meaning. The rain had taught me many things. How to slow down, how to listen, how to let things be unfinished without calling them broken. And now, as the last drops fell and vanished into the earth, it was teaching me the gentlest lesson of all. How to leave. I stood, brushed the moisture from my coat, and looked one last time at the city that only wakes when it rains. Its streets shimmered faintly, its windows blinking open like tired eyes, its quiet heart still beating beneath the cobblestones. I didn't say goodbye. Some places don't need it. Instead, I placed the key on the fountain's edge and whispered, "Rest well." As I turned to go, the wind stirred, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I heard the faintest sound, the murmur of an umbrella opening, the sigh of the clock tower, the hum of a tram bell far away. The city wasn't fading. It was simply falling asleep again, waiting for the next storm to wake it. I walked back through the soft light of morning, my footsteps quiet against the wet ground. The clouds thinned to white, and somewhere behind them, the sun waited, patient and kind. When the first golden ray touched the rooftops, I smiled. The rain had done its work. It had healed what it could and left the rest to peace. And as I stepped beyond the city's edge, I carried with me the only thing it had ever asked me to remember, that even when the storm falls asleep, the rain still listens.